Yes, we're open. Living Faith with Needham UCC, a sermon podcast from the Congregational Church of Needham United Church of Christ, where no matter who you are or where you are on life's journey, you're invited and welcome. This sermon for Sunday, May 29th, 2022, is entitled Our Peculiar Idolatry. It's a sermon reflecting on the Gospel according to Luke, chapter 3, verses 1 through 6. If you enjoy this podcast and would like to find out more about our open and affirming ministries at the Congregational Church of Needham United Church of Christ, simply head over to our website, www.needhamucc.org. Thank you.
Our reading today comes from the New Testament, from the Gospels, from the Gospel according to Luke, chapter 3, verses 1 through 6. Let's listen together for a living word from God for us in these words from Luke, chapter 3. In the 15th year of the reign of Emperor Tiberius, when Pontius Pilate was governor of Judea and Herod was ruler of Galilee, and his brother Philip, ruler of the region of Eritrea and Trachonitis, and Lysanias, ruler of Abilene, during the high priesthood of Annas and Caiaphas, the word of God came to John, son of Zechariah, in the wilderness. He went into all the region around the Jordan, proclaiming a baptism of repentance for the forgiveness of sins, as it is written in the book of the words of the prophet Isaiah, the voice of one crying in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord, make God's paths straight. Every valley shall be lifted, and every mountain and hill shall be made low, and the crooked shall be made straight, and the rough ways made smooth. And all flesh shall see the salvation of God. Friends, God is still speaking to the world and to us. May our hearts be open to listen and respond. Amen. A bit of ancient history. Back in the summer of 1990, after my sophomore year in college, I spent that summer living in Japan, where I did social justice volunteer work among the poorest and most disenfranchised communities there. I worked in a Korean ghetto in Kyoto and in a day laborer's slum in Osaka. Many of those people were descendants of low caste or outcast, sometimes called untouchable communities, going back centuries. The people I was working with told me stories about the history of their communities, about the great procession made by the Japanese Emperor Meiji in 1868. It was an enormous and lavish affair, a months-long parade around the country made by the emperor and more than 3,000 of his courtiers. The supposed point of this exercise was to reintroduce the emperor, newly restored after centuries of obscurity, to his loyal subjects. But in fact, at every step of the way, great pains were taken to shield the august personages from the painful realities of life among the lower classes, especially those deemed to be socially untouchable. Entire communities were torn down, whole populations were relocated, the landscape of their world forever altered, just to make things a little nicer, a little easier, a little more pleasant for the emperor, the elites and the politicians. The people be damned. I was working in those relocated ghettos that were still outcast, still oppressed, more than 120 years later. And the people who lived there were still suffering, still prisoners after a fashion, no longer because of the law, long since abolished, but because of long-standing practice and prejudice. In today's reading from the Gospel of Luke, John the Baptizer tells the people to prepare for the coming of the promised Messiah, that great and terrible day of the Lord when God's kingdom would come and God's will would at last be done on earth as it is in heaven. John's message is woven together with the words of the prophet Isaiah. Prepare the way of the Lord. Make God's paths straight. Every valley shall be filled, every mountain brought low, the crooked made straight, and the rough places plain. It sounds a bit like that Japanese imperial procession, right? The herald going before to cry out, God is coming, get out of the way. Tear up the dirty world by its roots and toss it aside. Bulldoze the whole mess. God doesn't want to see that. God doesn't want to see you. Gaze upon the glory of God and weep. Except not. Except the exact opposite. Yes, the purpose of Isaiah's prophetic pronouncement and John's call to repentance are both about altering the landscape of our world. But in contrast to the Japanese procession, it's not in order to protect the Most High and august personage of God from our messiness, the stink of this world, and our all too real lives. But rather, John and Isaiah cry out together in order that the whole world, all flesh together, might see and freely participate in the coming salvation. God's reign of justice, peace, and compassion. Particularly the outcasts, particularly those deemed lowest and least, the most vulnerable, the most at risk. So now as we stand here in the long gap between the way the world is and the way it should be, in between our way and God's highway, our calling as church is not to sweep all of our problems, all of our shortcomings as individuals and as nation under the rug. It's not to make things neat and pretty and easy so that when God arrives, God might look out upon our pretend perfection and deem us worthy of salvation. No, the good news of the gospel is that God is coming. The kingdom is coming. The change is coming, ready or not, whether we like it or not. In fact, we believe in Jesus, it has already begun. So the real challenge of the gospel for those of us who claim to follow Jesus is, what are we going to do about it? What are we going to do when the kingdom comes, when all of that justice comes rolling down like mighty waters, all of that peace comes flooding into our relationships, all of that compassion comes demanding literally that we remake the world? Because we can either prepare ourselves to receive it, body and soul, individuals and communities, and shape our lives accordingly, or we can step back and assess the situation of the most vulnerable among us, the situation of women and children, those living with disabilities, sexual and racial minorities, immigrants, heck, even the very earth under our feet, and say, it's not really so bad. Simply because it's really not so bad for us. We can cry out, somebody should do something, and go on ignoring the fact that God calls us to be somebody. We can throw up our hands and resign ourselves to all the pain and suffering, forgetting that our Creator, who made heaven and earth, has shared their powers of creation with us. We can stay right where we are and let the terrible tension between what God wills for the world and what we would rather do tear us apart. This is the choice and the mind-boggling power that God shares with us as children of God. The power to choose, the power to shape and reshape the world, the power to say yes or no to God. And beloved, right now in this country, we are choosing to say no to God and God's purposes. We are saying no to the common good of our fellow citizens. We are saying no to the health and well-being of our children. We are saying no to the rights of our neighbors to live lives free from fear in our schools, our churches, our workplaces, our streets, our homes. We are saying no to all of that to the degree that we are saying an unqualified yes to an almost entirely unregulated right to bear arms that all of a sudden, historically speaking, we have come to believe is enshrined in the Second Amendment to our Constitution. As a nation, we are saying yes to guns and no to God. And our civil society and our soul as a nation is being torn apart as a consequence of our choice. Now, if I can just sneak a word in here before we all retreat to our opposite corners and come out swinging, let me be clear here, and I need to be clear because this is odd even for me. Let me be clear that I agree with the National Rifle Association on this point. Guns themselves, by themselves, are not to blame for our current epidemic of gun violence. Guns themselves, by themselves, don't kill people. As they say, people kill people. It's true. Because after all, a gun is just a thing, an object, a tool of cold, hard steel, like a car. And when someone drives recklessly and kills another person, we don't blame just the car. We place the blame squarely on the person responsible who made that choice. Similarly, when someone chooses to use a gun recklessly or even with evil intent and people die, as they do, we shouldn't blame just the gun, but the person whose finger curled around the trigger and squeezed. Because a gun is just a thing. Now, it can be a useful thing to help put food on the table for some people. It can even be an enjoyable thing for target shooting or collecting, I'm told. It might even, God help us, be a necessary thing to defend against an immediate threat. But at the end of the day, a gun is still just a thing. A very, very powerful thing, to be sure, but a thing nonetheless. Which is exactly what makes it so difficult for me to understand how guns have taken on the mythic status they have for some of our fellow Americans, and the outsized role they play in our national psyche. It's not just that we believe the right to bear arms is enshrined in the Second Amendment. Under certain conditions, that is indisputable, no matter how we choose to read. But it's not just that. Because remember, as a nation, we have believed a lot of things. We once believed in the right of some people, namely white people, to outright own other people, namely black people. And we believed that was similarly guaranteed by the Constitution. And we once believed that some people, namely women, could not and indeed should not vote. And we used the Constitution to defend that as well. No, friends, we've believed a lot of things over the years, but we changed our minds. And we changed the law. Painfully, Slowly, to be sure, dragging our heels, often looking back, taking a few steps back, but ultimately we moved forward to a position we deemed better. So how is it that the mythology of guns has taken on such a life of its own among us? As a culture, we have allowed a serpent spirit to creep into our ears and whisper to us, into our leaders. We've allowed it to seduce us into believing that guns are more than they actually are. That utterly unfettered access to firearms is somehow an integral part of what it means to be good Americans and therefore a good America. That somehow just having the guns themselves, any kind of guns, will make us safe, certain, independent, powerful, all the things we long to be, despite the overwhelming scientific and sociological evidence to the contrary. Despite the very explicit experience of a seemingly now endless series of shootings, large and small, homicide and suicide, of gun crimes and gun terrorism and gun accidents, in big cities and small towns, in our houses of worship, our schools, our streets, our homes. We find ourselves caught in an irrational feedback loop. In the face of violence, not caused by, but certainly exacerbated by lax gun regulations, we claim that only access to more guns and bigger guns will protect us against them, so they'd better not come and try and take our guns from us. And this mass hysteria, this group psychosis, is so pervasive and so strong that it will admit absolutely no regulation whatsoever, no matter how reasonable, no matter how common sense, no matter how popular, the very sort of rules we put in place around every other powerful tool in our lives. Things like better background checks. Heck, in the case of gun shows and individual sales, any background checks at all. Better training and periodic retraining and retesting for gun licenses. Mandatory liability insurance for gun owners. Mandatory reporting of lost or stolen guns. Highly restricted access, if there must be access, to semi-automatic weapons, ammunition, and body armor. A national gun registry. Hell, how about just not selling guns to those with significant proven clinical evidence of mental illness? Or to folks that are suspected of being terrorists by our intelligence services? Even just the sort of regulations we've had for cars for years. Or the sort of restrictions that some would seek to impose on women for choosing abortion care for themselves. But no, none of that is deemed permissible or politically possible. It's as though the guns themselves have become the entire point. And I call that idolatry. Now, I know idolatry is an old-fashioned sounding church word, but hear me out. When we value a thing, a dead thing, over the lives of strangers and neighbors and family and friends, men and women and children, all of whom are made in the image of our living God, that is idolatry. When we allow ourselves to turn a blind eye again and again and again to the pain of others and choose to buy into the mythology of guns so deeply that we feel utterly powerless to make the sort of changes the gospel of Jesus Christ demands, that is idolatry. When we say yes to our own desires and to our own fears, regardless of the consequences, and no to God's desire for peace, justice, and compassion, that is sin. That is idolatry. Not the guns themselves, but our addiction to the guns. That is idolatry. And we are soaking in it, even as our country continues to be soaked in blood. Due as much to our long-standing idolatrous practice and prejudice around guns as due to the laws themselves. It has become part of our culture. So today I stand with John the Baptizer, that voice crying out in the wilderness to call us to repentance. All of us, red states and blue states, our entire nation, politicians and citizens, gun lobbyists and manufacturers, you and me, I call us all to change our minds and change the world. Thoughts and prayers are clearly not enough. We need to take action, because only action will stem the rising tide of gun violence among us. The power of thoughts and prayers to stop a speeding bullet are exactly nil. This requires action. The deepest valleys will have to be lifted. The mountains that we believe to be immovable are going to have to be moved. And the really, really rough places among us will have to be made plain. But we have chosen to live in this valley of the shadow of death for so very long. Just as with racism and sexism and homophobia and transphobia and the abuse of the earth and every other persistent, demonic, idolatrous sin, it's going to take nothing less than a seismic shift in the way we order our lives together to make a difference. Beloved, we are going to have to rise up together. At first in our 2s and 3s, and then our thousands, and then our millions, and say no. No to the moneyed interests and industries that profit from our pain and fear and misguided pride. No to the process by which they purchase the votes of our politicians in order to protect their profits and their narrow-minded self-interest. No to the divisive politics as usual of the 24-hour news cycle and talk radio and anti-social media. No to the fear itself, growing like a cancer within us. Fear of others, fear of our own vulnerability, fear of being powerless, fear of a world changing so rapidly around us. No to our sense of powerlessness and self-pity. No. No. No more. And yes. Yes, God. Yes. Yes, Lord, have your way with us. Come to us and cast down our dead and deadly idols. Cast out the demons. Cast off whatever keeps us bound to these harmful ways of relating. No matter how seemingly sacred the institutions, if they keep any of your beloved children from enjoying the abundant life that is your intention for all whom you have made, Lord, help us to pluck them up, plow them under, pave them over, and drive them out. Lift us, Lord, level us, liberate us, rock our world, and refashion it, remake us according to your love. Alter the landscape of our lives, Lord, not to make things easier for our politicians or our own privilege, but to make life better and more abundant for the poorest and most vulnerable among us and us along with them. Restore us. Restore us to our rightful minds so that we can restore these things, these dead things, these guns to their proper place in our lives. Help us to see our self-deception for the sin it is. Help us to know the difference between a dead thing and the living neighbor next to us. Help us to say no to all that is less than love and yes to all the ways of love. Not just once, yes, but again, yes, and again, yes. And even in the face of fear, O Lord, yes. And in the face of opposition, yes. Now is the time, O God. Yes, these are the changes we need to make. Yes, and changes we can make. Yes, and changes we can be. Yes, you tell us, Lord, if we have faith, yes, and the courage of our convictions, yes, we shall say even to the mountain, yes, get up and be ye removed. Yes, for even in the season of shadows, O God, we celebrate that you and your yes are coming to us. And yes, with you, nothing is impossible. Yes, Lord, even this. Yes, yes, yes. I want to let you in on a secret. I didn't write this sermon. Or rather, I did write this sermon, but I didn't write this sermon this week. I wrote it, but I wrote it in December of 2015. Nearly 7 years ago now, after the mass shooting at the Inland Regional Center in San Bernardino, California. Remember that? Where 14 people were killed and 22 injured. Not the mass shooting outside a bar in San Bernardino last week, just to be clear. That was before. That was before the mass murder at the Pulse nightclub in Orlando, Florida. Before the killings of police officers in Dallas, Texas, and Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Before the concert in Las Vegas. Before First Baptist Church in Sutherland Springs, Texas. Before Stoneman Douglas High School and Santa Fe High School. Before the Capital Gazette in Annapolis. Before the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh. Before the explicitly racist murders at Walmart in El Paso, Texas. Before the supermarket shooting in Boulder, Colorado. And before so many, many others. And it was before the murders these last 2 weeks at the Irvine Taiwanese Presbyterian Church in Laguna Woods, California, at the Tops grocery store in Buffalo, New York, and at Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, Texas. And my dear ones, nothing has changed. Nothing has changed. No significant legislation has passed. Actually, I'll take that back. Laws have been passed to make guns even easier to access, to permit concealed and open carry of firearms in more states, including my home state of Texas. And things have gotten worse. So my sermon has not changed. Not one word. But beloved, we must change. We must no longer offer just our thoughts and prayers for the victims. We must offer ourselves to be changed. We must act, and we must pray only in preparation for ourselves to act. So we remember the lives of those lost to gun violence most recently. As Dr. Cornel West says, we must let their suffering speak if we want to hear the truth. The truth about who we have been and who we are and who we may yet become. We say their names not just as a memorial, but as a witness against us. Should we fail, should we continue to fail to be the change and make the change the gospel calls us to make? And so from the Tops grocery store in Buffalo, New York, May 10th, Roberta A. Drury, age 32. Margus D. Morrison, age 52. Andre McNeil, age 53. Aaron Salter, age 55. Geraldine Talley, age 62. Celestine Cheney, age 65. Hayward Patterson, age 67. Catherine Massey, age 72. Pearlie Young, age 77. Ruth Whitfield, age 86. From the Irvine Presbyterian Church in Laguna Woods, California, May 15th, John Chang, age 52. And from Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, Texas, May 24th, Alexandria Ania Rubio, age 10. Alethea Ramirez, age 10. Amory Jo Garza, age 10. Annabelle Guadalupe Rodriguez, age 10. Eliana Cruz Torres, age 10. Ellie Garcia, age 9. Eva Mireles, age 44. Irma Garcia, age 48. Jacqueline Cazares, age 10. Jaila Nicole Siguero, age 10. Jace Luevanos, age 10. Jose Flores, age 10. Leila Salazar, age 10. McKenna Lee Elrod, age 10. Maite Juliana Rodriguez, age 10. Miranda Mathis, age 11. Navae Bravo, age 10. Rogelio Torres, age 10. Tess Marie Mata, age 10. Uzia Garcia, age 8. Xavier Lopez, age 10. Oh God, hear our prayer. Oh God, hear our prayer. Oh God, hear our prayer.